Speed, Module 1, Lesson 3, the final lesson of Module 1 of Speed, solving up to 3-step word problems involving speed. Calculators are allowed. Now that we have understood the concept of the DST triangle and how to calculate average speed, we are going to try a few different word problems. Just remember to write out the information you're given in a systematic way, and you should have no problems at all. If you still have difficulty, go over the videos and notes again and you'll be fine. The objectives of this lesson: figure out how to do 3-step word problems involving speed. Objective number 2 is draw timelines to help work out the problems. Ready? Let's jump straight into it and I'll explain it to you further. Question 1. At 11 a.m., Joe began cycling from Yishun towards Katong at a speed of 11 kilometers per hour. At the same time, Pat began cycling from Katong towards Yishun at a speed of 13 kilometers per hour. If the two towns are 72 kilometers apart, at what time will they meet each other? Interesting question, but it will drive some of us crazy. So let's figure out how to do this well. Let's figure out the concept, because once you get the concept, and the concept is called timeline, right? I believe you can repeat this for other questions that look similar. Now, do step 1. Let's do step 1. Let's draw the timeline. Yishun to Katong. Yishun to Katong, that is 72 kilometers. The distance is 72 kilometers. Now, Joe leaves at 11 a.m. at the speed of 11 kilometers per hour from Yishun to Katong, right? That's Joe. Pat leaves Katong towards Yishun at 13 kilometers per hour. That's Pat. Now we can see that all together they will cover a total distance of 72 kilometers. We need to see that. We've got to visualize that, right? Together they will cover 72 kilometers. We also know that in 1 hour, Joe will cover 11 kilometers and Pat will cover 13 kilometers because the speed is given as 11 kilometers per hour and 13 kilometers per hour. Using this information, we can figure out how long they took to cover the total distance. Step 2. What is the total distance traveled? Total distance traveled is 72 kilometers. What is the average speed? Because they are covering this distance together, you can actually add Pat's and Joe's average speed, which is 11 plus 13, which is what? 24 kilometers per hour. So from here we can calculate total time taken. Total time equals to total distance, which is 72 kilometers, total distance over average speed, equals to 72 over 24. Do the division and the time taken is 3 hours. So what time did they meet? 11 a.m. plus, that is step 3, right? You know they started off at 11 a.m. They would have met after 3 hours, which is 2 p.m. Right? They would have met at 2 p.m. Well done. Question 2, students, we're on a roll. At 2 p.m., Anne and Kat left the park and traveled in opposite directions along a straight road. Their average speeds were 45 kilometers per hour and 50 kilometers per hour respectively. How far apart are they at 3:30 p.m.? How far apart, which means final answer is a distance. So let's look at step 1 and begin to draw the timeline just like earlier. Okay? Timeline. Get into the habit of drawing a good timeline. Anne left the park at 2 p.m. traveling in one direction at 45 kilometers per hour. That's Anne in red. 45 kilometers per hour. Then we come to Kat, who went in the complete opposite direction at 50 kilometers per hour. At 50 kilometers per hour. Okay, now let's move on to step 2. Let's look at the total time traveled. We are interested in finding out how far they are apart at 3:30 p.m. and they started the journey at 2 p.m. So from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. So what is the time lapse over there? It's 1 hour 30 minutes, which is 1.5 hours or 1.5 hours. That's the total time traveled. We know that in 1 hour, Anne will cover 45 kilometers and Kat will cover 50 kilometers. We can now find out how much they cover altogether in the 1.5 hours as well as the total distance traveled. Let's move to step 3. Remember, Anne and Kat are doing this together. They are traveling this distance together. So you can add their speeds. So average speed equals to Kat and Anne, 45 plus 50. And your answer is 95 kilometers per hour. 95 kilometers per hour. What is total time taken? Total time taken is 1.5 hours. Now, total distance traveled. Total D is equals to average speed multiplied by total time taken, which is 95 kilometers multiplied by 1.5 hours. And your final answer is 142.5 kilometers. They are at 3:30 p.m. 142.5 kilometers apart, and that's your final answer. Let's move on to question 3. Question 3. At 9 a.m., a bus left town A and traveled towards town B at an average speed of 70 kilometers per hour. Half an hour later, a car traveling the same route caught up with the bus after traveling for 210 kilometers. What is the average speed of the car? We are looking for the average speed. That is going to be the final answer. Let's draw the timeline. That is always step 1. Okay, town A to town B. Town A to town B. Bus goes at 70 kilometers per hour. Car also goes at a particular speed but covers the same distance. Particular speed but covers the same distance. We don't know the speed of the car. Okay? Okay, car also goes the same distance. Now let's look at step 2. Let's find the time taken for the bus to get to where the car caught up. Right? The car caught up at some point. Let's find the time taken for that. So total distance traveled, total D here is 210 kilometers when the car actually caught up with the bus. Average speed of the bus is actually 70 kilometers per hour. So what is the total time taken here? What is the total time? Total T is equals to total D over average speed, which is equals to 210 over 70, which is 3 hours. So it was 3 hours into the journey when the car actually caught up with the bus. But remember this, the car started half an hour later. So we can easily find out the time taken by the car as well as its average speed. So step 3 is this. Total distance traveled is the same distance, 210 kilometers. Total D is still 210 kilometers, but total T is 3 hours minus half an hour because the car left half an hour later. The car started its journey half an hour later. 3 minus 1/2 is 2.5 hours. Okay, now calculate the average speed again. Average speed equals to total distance, which is 210 kilometers, total D over total T. Let's write down the formulas first, which is equals to 210 kilometers divided by 2.5 hours, which is equals to 84 kilometers per hour. That is the average speed of the vehicle, of the car. And that is your final answer. Move on. Last question of Speed's Module 1 Lesson 3. Angie took 2 hours to travel from Park X to Park Y. Lisa took 3 hours to travel from Park Y to Park X. If both girls began their journey at 10:20 a.m., what time will they pass each other? If both girls began their journey at 10:20 a.m., what time will they pass each other? You know what I would really love? Parents to sit down with you guys and figure this out together. I would love it. And if you can teach it to your parents and make them understand, you are a genius. And I believe you will be able to do that. Step 1, let's begin by drawing the timeline. Once again, Park X to Park Y. Park X to Park Y. Angie moves in one direction. Park X to Park Y. She goes from X to Y. And she takes 2 hours. Okay, she takes 2 hours. That's Angie, right? 2 hours. Angie in red. Let's do Lisa now. Lisa goes from Y to X and she takes 3 hours. We covered a similar problem like this earlier. At some point, they are going to meet each other along this journey, and when they do meet, they would have covered the whole distance. And that's the key to figuring out the answer when it comes to a problem like such as this. Okay, let's try and figure this out. Angie took 2 hours for the whole journey. So a little bit of trial and error. You got to put on your thinking hat and just kind of figure this out. She took 2 hours for the whole journey, which means she traveled half the journey in 1 hour. Lisa took 3 hours for the whole journey, which means she traveled 1/3 of the journey in 1 hour. This is a fact. We know this much. So let's use these facts, this information, to calculate the journey or the time they travel together. Okay? Now step 2. So let's find out how much of the journey they travel all together in 1 hour. Right? So we are trying to figure out in a fraction how much of the journey they travel in 1 hour. Angie covers half the journey and Lisa covers 1/3 of the journey. So half plus 1/3 is equals to 5/6. They cover this amount of the journey in 1 hour. We have to understand this part for us to move on. Now that we know that altogether, now that we know that together they travel 5/6 of the journey, we can find out how it took them to cover 6/6 or the whole journey using the units method. Okay? Step 3, we're using the units method. So now we know 5/6 of the journey was covered in 1 hour. So if 5/6 of the journey was covered in 1 hour, what about 6/6, the whole journey? So 5 units equals to 1 hour. 1 unit is equals to 1/5 of an hour, 1/5 of an hour. So if that is 1 unit, what is 6 units? 6 units is going to be 1/5 times 6. 1/5 times 6, which is going to be 1 1/5 of an hour. If you convert that into hours and minutes, you will get 1 hour and 12 minutes, because 1/5 of an hour is 12 minutes. 1 hour and 12 minutes. Now step 3. Now we can find out what time they met, because we know the time they've taken to cover the whole journey, 1 hour 12 minutes. Both of them traveling in opposite directions. They left at 10:20 a.m. You add 1 hour plus 12 minutes to that journey, and they met at 11:32 a.m. And that is your final answer, 11:32 a.m. That is the time they met. Now students, I know this was a tricky lesson, okay? Now if you still have difficulties, I want you to feel free to email me. I am convinced that you understand everything, but let's say you find a challenging problem somewhere out there. I want you to email it to me. mycampus@scorecampus.com, and I will get videos done up about the questions and concerns that you have. Go ahead and attempt the quiz. I want you to go ahead and ace it. Go score.